Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me, and this is part 2 of a series that I'm doing on putting on games, putting on larger games, especially ones that have got multiple participants. So in the first part, just a quick recap, or in case you haven't seen it, we discussed how to find a period that you want to do, how to find a battle in that period that you want to do. One thing I missed off there was what different resources are out there for people to look through. I mentioned the Osprey books, and I own pretty much all of the Napoleonic ones. They're very good. There's other ones as well. There's things like Napoleon at War. There's the Esdale series on the Peninsular War. There's a million different options out there, and especially with the internet as well. There's a great site called Napoleon.org. And that's a fantastic site for uniforms, army information, organisation, battles, personalities, you name it, it's on there. It's a great site. And it's all, made by some bloke. It's not professional or anything. So if you can go on there, give him some extra traffic, then I'd highly, highly recommend it. I've got no contact with it myself, other than the fact that I use it quite a lot. So once we've decided what battle we're going to have, and what portion of that battle we're going to play, the next part is to look at what forces fought that part of the battle and which ones we can recreate using our own collections. So looking at the Aspern-Essling and Wagram book, which is my absolute bible for this project, I can see that Oudinot's 2 corps is in there, and it contains 26,000 infantry, 1,600 cavalry, and 64 guns. I can also see that the corps of Hohenzollern, which is also 2 corps, that contained roughly the same, 25,000 men, 520 cavalry, and 68 guns. So slightly outguns Oudinot's 2 corps there. So obviously, let's take the French corps as an example. There's 26,000 infantrymen there. I have a large French collection for Napoleonic Wargaming. I do not have 26,000 figures though, nor do I have the space for 26,000 figures. So what we do is we often have ratios. So a common one in historical wargaming is 1 figure represents 20 real men. Another very popular one is 1 figure represents 33 real men. I find 1 to 20 much easier because, while I'm okay at maths, dividing numbers by 33, I think, is a lot more difficult than dividing them by 20. So, how can we convert these numbers into black powder units? Well, what I'm going to talk about here, I'm only going to talk about one division, and it's the 1st Division under Thurot. And we're going to look at how we can turn his division into black powder units. And then, obviously it's repeat as often as needed for that. We might discuss the cavalry afterwards as well, just because they're slightly different. So, if you look on the screen right now, you can see the order of battle page from the Osprey campaign book. And we can see that the 1st Division under Thurot has 2 general de brigades underneath him. So that's fairly common for a French division. Have 2 brigades, each led by a general de brigade. And we can see here that they're often made up of demi-brigades. So what they are is that's a group of battalions that are maybe too small to operate individually. They bung them all together and they form a demi-brigade. That's a very French thing to do. Not many other nations did that. But here we can see it in action. So we can see that the 1st demi-brigade Léger has 1,377 men in there. Now that one was actually made up of 3 battalions, I think, 3 or 4 battalions of Léger, so 3 battalions of light infantry. Now I'm not going to worry too much about the individual battalions. The demi-brigades would have operated as a single unit, so that's fine. So 1,377 men, it says in brackets there. So divide that by 20 and we end up with about 64-ish figures. I mean, that's rounding it off slightly. So 64 figures. So we look in black powder, and units are 24 figures for medium-sized units, or 36 for large. So I normally go for large regiments with my French. So there's two ways we can run it. We can either run it as 2 medium battalions. That'll give us 48 figures, which is, short of what we need, but it gets it across there. Or we can have a large and a medium, which will give us 60 figures, or we can just count them as a large. Now, for this game that we're having on the 29th, I'm going to count that as one large regiment. Now, that is slightly underselling it a little, because a large regiment, 36 figures, represents around about 720 men. I get that, okay? So, it's going to currently go down as one large regiment of lights. This is because I need to know that we've got enough figures. That said, if we find out that we've got enough figures, that may become 2 large regiments of light infantry. Realistically, it should be a large and a small, but for ease of use, I'm just going to make any demi-brigade like that, if I subdivide it into regiments, into smaller battalions, I'm just going to make those battalions the same size as each other, just because it's so much easier that way. So, carries on with the 3rd demi-brigade Leger. That's 2,115 men. Now, that's obviously a lot more than the first one, so I'm going to have to do more figures there. So, maybe 2 large regiments there, maybe 3, and that'll pick up the excess that we didn't use on the first Leger. My point really is that you've got to get across the sort of general ratio of men. It doesn't have to be exact, but it has to be rough. So if you've got a battalion of 1,000 men and a battalion of 500 men, the battalion of 1,000 men needs to be bigger. You've also got to take into account the actual number of figures that you've got. If I have one large regiment, then that's 36 figures and 1 command group. If I have 2 medium regiments, I need 48 figures and 2 command groups. So it's very much a question of logistics here. It's what you've got available to you. The final, and one of the best bits of advice I can give you, is you don't necessarily need all the figures on the table at the same time. This is particularly good with French, because they don't change their uniforms in between regiments. Okay, you might have a different number on your Shako plate or whatever, but it's very unlikely that anyone's going to bother about that on a 28mm figure. So you could have troops in reserve. So what we're going to have in our big game is the Portuguese Legion under Carmeleggio and I think Grandjean's division, perhaps. They're going to count as reserve. So they're going to come on once the first figures have been defeated or destroyed, run away, whatever. So that means that we can recycle some of the figures. So if we have 2 divisions on the table and 2 in reserve, then we've halved the number of figures that we actually need. Sort of, not really, because there's still going to be some remnants of those front 2 divisions on the table. Sorry, those front 2 brigades on the table. So, you've reduced the number of figures you probably need by about a third. So that's another cheeky way of doing it. Get those scenario special rules in there, get those reserves in there, and that's really going to help you maximise the number of units you've got and minimise the number of figures. It's really useful for battles where reserves were a big part of them. So Fuentes d'Onoro, the attack on the actual village, that was very good for reserves. The attack on Hougoumont, it was very good for adding reserves. The attack on Aspern-Essling, the French were sending reinforcements over the river on very rickety bridges that were, knocked together very loosely. So all these scenarios are good if you've not got 1,000,000 men, because you can add reserves as the game goes on. You can recycle those casualties. Again, you know what? If the 3rd Leger gets destroyed and then comes back on again, masquerading as the 13th Leger or whatever, who cares? It's a battalion of French light infantry, so they can count as a battalion of French light infantry. With the cavalry, slightly different, because certainly French cavalry would operate together. So we can see that, for argument's sake, the 7th Chasseurs à Cheval had 4 squadrons, totaling 478 men. Now, they would have all operated as a single 478-man block. But that would be 24 figures in our 1 to 20-man ratio. So I think we can make that 2 regiments of 12, and that'll really help us out when it comes to, manoeuvring and things like that. We can just count them as 2 medium-sized units. If you were particularly wanting to keep them together, then you could say they have to stay within 6 inches of each other, or 12 inches, or you make up a number that you feel really puts across that these units have to stay together. So that's really all it comes down to when designing the scenario. I'm going to go through the setup of the actual Battle of Wagram that we're doing in a separate game. I'm going to be recording the game. Hopefully I'm going to be recording the whole thing, as well as doing the end of turn summaries that you're used to seeing. That'll be out round about New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. It might be my New Year's gift to you all. But it's going to take a couple of days, I'd have thought, to just to edit and make sure it's okay and everything. So thank you very much for watching the second part of the video. It's gone incredibly quickly. I was hoping to get a little bit more in than that, but I don't want to overload people. I want to try and keep these videos at about 10 minutes. So the salient point to take away from this one, I think, is make sure that your scenario is fitting the figures that you've got, not the other way around. If you just say, right, I need to paint Udino's entire corps of men, you'll never get the game done. The key point is, say, right, well, I haven't got enough figures for 4 divisions at the moment, or 3 divisions. So what I'll do is I'll keep 2 or 1 of them in reserve, and then we can bring those on later with some recycled figures when we need to. So thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for the big Wagram events that we've got coming up. I'm hopefully we'll have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 videos around that. Thank you for watching this far. Please give a like to the video if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel grow. Leave any comments you've got in the description down below. And I look forward to seeing you on the fields of Wagram in a few days. Thank you very much. Goodbye.